much. But if you do need the pointer, so that
I'm close enough.
okay, you're good. Okay, go ahead.
Well, so thanks for the introduction. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to listen with you this morning. Canoes and guitars, how can I compete with that? And had I known, I would have brought my Les Paul to sex up my data-rich performance. So I'll apologize right up front. As usual, I've got a lot of data to show you, and it helps to make my point. So we're going to talk about cover crop adoption, and I'm going to show you what I'm doing professionally and what our group is doing to increase cover crop adoption so that we can improve quality in not only the Fox River, but across the state of Wisconsin, so we can improve recreational opportunities. So I am a member of the Watershed Protection Committee of Racine County. I'm a very proud member. We've got a display over there. I invite you to come and visit with our members at that time. And I'd also like to ask at this time that our members stand up just so we can acknowledge them. What you're seeing, our public face, is only the tip of the iceberg. We do a lot of work. We do a lot of work behind the scenes to increase adoption of practices that improve water quality. Not just cover crops, that's my professional area of expertise, but also no-till, nutrient management, buffers, and that kind of thing. And I'm really proud to be a part of this group, one of the most active in the state, but also to work with some of the other groups around the state, and I'll talk about that when we get there. So personally, I'm a research agronomist. I'm an independent. I've got ties to Extension and the Michael Fields Institute in East Troy. Professionally, if you include graduate school, I've been working on adoption for the last 35 years, and rather ineffectually, I might add. So we know in the state of Wisconsin, we lag behind our neighbor states. Here in South Wisconsin, we somewhat lag behind the state in general. Now, the statistics are a little bit confusing because we've got the central sands where they are pretty much forced into using cover crops. That kind of skews our use statistics, but still, we lag and we could do a lot better job. The last 30 years, excuse me, I have also farmed. So I farm in the Mukwonago River watershed. And in fact, a tributary runs through my farm. So I'm really cognizant of water quality and how my farming operations impact the water quality. So I've been using cover crops from the beginning. So I've got 30 years experience. And currently I've got 100% cover crops on my farm. So let's look at my title. So we're looking at adoption, carrots, sticks, and many little hammers. So the carrots, we have ample cost share availability to help farmers start their cover crop journey. And we know we're not fully utilizing it. So what about the sticks? We can't force it with regulation. So that means we need to look at the many little hammers. And with many little hammers, to explain it, is the incentives and the benefits the farmers are going to fully realize that members of my group and what I personally have realized in using cover crops that are primarily financial in nature. And so when we look at all of them, in some, they are the silver bullet, but there is no silver bullet. We need to look at the contribution of each and every one of them, and together they should provide a compelling argument. And I will argue today that the argument is financial, and that's based on survey data, and I'll show you that on my next slide. The argument is financial or associative, it's managerial, but primarily it's money that's going to drive the adoption. All right, so last 10 years, I have worked solely on financial issues. This is driven by the SARE National Cover Crop Survey. So they've been doing this for the last 10 years. I rely primarily on this data, and the reason is it's iterative. So they do it periodically every 2 years. They ask the same questions so we can look at changes over time. But then periodically, or not periodically, but once in a while, they will look at a specific issue that's driving cover crop adoption. So when this thing first started back in 2012, they were looking primarily at the impact of the drought on cover crop use and how can cover crops help farmers manage drought. The 2019-2020 cycle, they looked primarily at wetness. Universally across the United States, we had a very wet growing season. How did farmers use cover crops to manage the wet conditions and make a go of it farming? Mid-cycle, so in the mid-teens, I think it was the 2015, 2016, they looked specifically at the practice of cost sharing and how can we get more farmers to use cover crops. So I'm going to address that a little bit. The other thing that I really like about this survey is they're not just talking to the users, they also talk to the non-users. What keeps you from using cover crops? And I would further, based on the way they qualify their data, I would divide the non-users into two groups. The haters, these are people that are never going to use a cover crop. And these people make up a sub-portion of the non-user group. Now let's be frank, we're never going to change their mind. They're never going to do it. But they respond to our survey. And that's kind of well, that's a useful thing, just put it that way. The other are the people that are interested, but they need a compelling argument. And the survey shows that the arguments are economic. Why don't people use cover crops? No demonstrated economic benefit. There's a real fear of yield reduction. They say that it complicates management, especially weeds. There's added cost with no financial reward, as well as a time commitment. It increases risk, and a huge one in my mind, the benefits, at least the perceived benefits, are long-term. And they point out, and this is a problem in Wisconsin, that a lot of the cropland, well, it doesn't apply to rented cropland. Huge problem in the state of Wisconsin because 50% of our cropland is leased and it's on short-term leases. Typical lease in the state of Wisconsin, 3 years. So if you're not going to get the benefit in the short term, why would you do it? Our data from our winter workshops next slide, please. Next slide. Why is it when I touch it, it doesn't work?
No, it's working. It's working. It's working.
It's working now. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. So our group has an annual winter workshop, and we conduct an evaluation at the end to find out how we did, and also to look for future topics that we can present and hopefully get people to adopt. Last year's workshop, after a long day of presenting regenerative agriculture, the best we've got, the people that responded to our evaluation said, and it bears out what the Sierra Cover Crop Survey says, hey, regenerative agriculture is great, but how do I actually implement these practices and make them pay? So right there, that's the financial thing. Hey, regenerative agriculture is great, but how do I implement the practices in the short term and remain profitable? So what this gets at is how long does it take to see a benefit? And somewhat, there must be a transition period where you go from a system that's not seeing the benefit to a system where you're seeing the benefit. There's a transition in there. And then the third one hits the least problem right on the head. What about rental ground? So that ground truths what the cover crop survey is showing nationally. So we just held our workshop last year. We had a very inspirational speaker talk about his journey in regenerative agriculture, cover crop heavy, inspired our audience. These are non-users, most of them are non-users. They said, hey, we want to see more data and we want to see it from local farms. So to me, the key, and it shows up in the STAIR survey, it shows up in our data, the key is to provide believable financial, economic data to get increased adoption.
Yeah.
All right, so what do the users say? The non-users say no demonstrated economic benefit. We're worried about yield reduction. The users say, hey, we're seeing a yield increase, especially in a drought year. And then they go on to provide what they estimate is their yield response. And it's pretty positive. I mean, there's a lot of practices that are out there. People will buy a solution in a jug. The retailer will say, hey, you're going to get a 2% yield response. Farmers will invest in it. Rate of return. Look at the reported returns. In corn, up to 9.6% return. That's huge. We have very few practices that are going to offer that kind of return. In soybeans, it's up to 11.5%. Huge return. The problem is people don't believe the self-reported data. What they say in the survey is, we need data from randomized replicated trials, but trials that are conducted on farm, not small plot research conducted on a research station, but conducted on farm. We have data then that we can believe that will make the argument. If you can make it, we will do it. And that's the sole basis of my research program today. The non-users also say, hey, it complicates weed management, it complicates management, especially weed management, and it adds cost and commitment. The users are saying, hey, it improves our weed control, it reduces input costs, especially herbicide. Total disconnect between the two. Increases risk. 2019, a stress year because of all the moisture. A lot of prevented plant acres. Farmers can't prevent, so they have to take crop insurance to deal with the fact that they can't have an income producing crop. What do the users say? The practice of planting green. You all know what planting green is? Never heard of it. It's growing a cover crop. It's planting into the cover crop while it's still actively growing and terminating at a later date. So planting green is going to show up over and over in what I'm talking about. What do the users say? Planting green allows us to plant earlier because we're managing that excess moisture, drying out the seed bed. And in a lot of cases, they say, hey, planting green prevented us from having prevented plant acres. In other words, we could plant the crop. My fingers are obviously too big. So how do we bridge the gap? It's like Wisconsin Republicans and Democrats. They don't talk to one another. How do we bridge the gap? The people that conduct the survey say it's pretty simple. We need to better communicate our success stories and recognize that the fundamental worries, the reasons people aren't doing it, are tightly held. So we need to provide a compelling argument and recognize that the haters, they're never going to do it. Work on the people that are interested. You just got to provide the data. There's some other considerations in the survey. Cost share. So this came up in the 2015, 2016. Again, we have ample cost share opportunity for farmers here in Southeast Wisconsin. From the 2019 survey, 45% of users say they don't accept cost share. The survey that looks specifically at the issue of cost share, 59% of cover crop users said they never used cost share. So I've been using cover crops on my farm for 30 years now. I haven't received a cost share benefit until last year. So I've done it all on my own. I've got my motivations, but we're not going to talk about it. Let's talk about the people that need to adopt. All right, so based on this, knowing we need economic data, knowing that we need data that's from farm fields and not from research stations or anecdotal evidence, I launched a series of trials, mostly funded by the USDA SARE program, SARE is Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program, to look at components of the economic picture. Directly at economics or at ways that we can reduce production costs and get towards producing a positive financial return. This study here is the genesis of all my further work, and a lot of trials have evolved from this one. The title of this project was Do Cover Crops Pay? This was a real simple trial, an on-farm trial, 2 treatments, replicated experiments with 2 treatments, with cover, without. The farmer cooperators did what they normally do. They managed the cover crop, they managed the crop the way they normally do. I collected the data the agronomic data, as well as the financial data, the prices that they paid for products, the prices they received for their crops, and did a financial analysis. What our data show, of the 14 site years of usable data that we had, positive yield response in 71% of cases. Our mean response in corn, so we have both corn and soybean response crops. Our mean response, corn, the yield response of 2.1%, soybeans a little better at 2.3%. In the economic conditions of the time, and so this is 2017 through 2019, when we run the numbers, do a sensitivity analysis, we found that we needed a break-even response between 5 and 6%. So how are we going to overcome this? Farmers can't, for the most part, farmers can't influence the price they receive for the crops. We can't change the market, so we have to look at increasing our yields. So the break even between 5 and 6%. The data is in the box plot there. You see soybean, the data is always positive and it's really tightly clustered. We're always seeing a 2 to 3% yield response. It comes close to break even. Corn is where we see a lot more variability, and you can see that in the box plot on the green. The variability to me is potential. And there's a lot of upside potential. We just need to identify practices that will increase the yield response to generate a positive return. When we run the numbers, we found that our average net return was a reduction in income of $18.25. We had a range in a high-cost system from losing $60 an acre to a benefit of $5.16 an acre. When I showed this to my cooperators, they looked at it and said, we're not losing money. What we did was reduce our cover crop costs by 58%. That's a real positive way to look at it. But we can do better by increasing our yield response. And that's what the rest of the work is about. This work led to 3 additional observations. The first is we can get a response to a cover crop, a first-year response on fields that have never had a cover crop. And here's one of the cases. This field here had never seen a cover crop. This field also, well, the field had never seen a cover crop. This individual also did not plant a cover crop following soybean. Typically on this farm, he plants winter wheat. Wasn't able to do it, so he participated in the trial, planted winter rye, and you can see the conservation performance. So these pictures and measurements were taken just before termination. We have 40% living ground cover, which is protecting the fragile soil that's in this field. And we're also able to reduce nitrate and nitrogen by 30 pounds per acre. So we potentially prevented leaching, but also now it's available to the following corn crop. What did we find? This is the largest single yield response. 10 bushels to the acre, yield increase 5.3%. That's an eye opener. This individual still grows wheat, but he has increased his cover crop acreage in the other situations where he's done it. That created a believer. The second thing that we found from this trial, even though we had 14 site years of data from our sites, we were too similar in soil types and cropping systems. So I couldn't tease out what's causing the yield response and what doesn't. So we had this spectacular yield response just down the road, a quarter of a mile down the road, similar soil types, similar practices, we saw no yield response. What causes the difference? We don't know. That led to the next generation in research. The third observation that we made, and this matches what the users say in the cover crop situation. In 2019, it was really wet. One of my cooperating farmers planned to terminate before planting, was forced into planting green to let the rye grow up like this. We found in the no cover treatment in the summer that we had a horrible infestation of water. Those of you that aren't familiar with agriculture and weeds in general, water hemp is one of our most vexing weed problems. In the cover crop plots, very little weed pressure from water hemp. hey, what the people are saying in the survey is true. We need to work on that. That's the third trial that I'm going to talk about. So anyway, this led us to our next step. And this is a current project. The title is, Can Cover Crops Pay? Can we find a way to increase the yield response to make it so it's a standalone practice, it'll pencil out, and farmers are willing to adopt it? Same basic idea as that smaller trial. It differs in the fact that we have a different set of treatments. Not only do we have the no cover control treatment, we have the base cover crop practice that the farmer is using, but we also have a modification. What the modification is a wrinkled and cover crop management. And in aggregate, what that's going to allow us to do is look at best management practices. Which termination time, which seeding rate, given environmental conditions, create the largest return. So other than that, it's relatively the same as the initial trial, but it's conducted on a much broader landscape and over a lot more environment. So we get different growing conditions of growing seasons, which really showed up in 2022. So down here, we had a really wet spring, we had a drought, and then followed by a really wet fall. So all my cooperators up north, they had ideal growing conditions. It wasn't as wet in the spring, they planted in a timely fashion, and they had timely rain throughout the growing season. The other thing we're able to capture is differences in soil types. So our first trial was on pretty much uniform soil types. Here we've got well-drained soil types to soil types that are poorly drained. So it's over a broader range of conditions. Our summary, I don't have data here to show you. It's a good thing because we'd be here the rest of the day. I'd be talking about it. We had 30 sites in 2022. I'll show you where they are scattered on the map. 10 of the sites were here in the basin, conducted by members of the Watershed Protection Committee of Racine County. Most of our sites, and this follows the trend in the state of Wisconsin, most are looking at cereal rye. 2/3 were in soybean, following corn. Soybean, for you non-agronomists, is our weak link in soil conservation. This is where we see most of the erosion. And then the comparisons, and this is kind of stunning. It's certainly interesting, but kind of stunning to me. 2/3 of these trials are looking at seeding rate. We've had recommendations for years. Why are they looking at seeding rates on the farm? They're looking at ways that I would assume are going to reduce their input costs. How low can we go and get the benefit? So here we are on the map. So part of the strategy behind this is to use the producer-led groups as our outreach mechanism. So the trials tend to be clustered within areas where we have active producer-led groups. So here in the southeast, these 10 sites here are members of the Watershed Protection Committee. I've got 11 or 12 sites in Jefferson County. That original trial I talked about, those farmers form the nucleus of what is now a producer-led group called the Jefferson County Soil Builders. And their project and their interest in working on-farm research is a core of that group. The group also, one of our cooperators, includes this site here, which is the chair of the group, and that's one of my strategies. If you get a chair of one of the watershed protection groups in your project, you're going to be able to sell the project to your membership. Same thing goes for Rock County. So this is Tony Pirates Farm here. There's 5 sites, or Rock County, Dodge County. 5 sites in Dodge County, much different growing conditions up there, and also much different soil types. So Tony is the chair of that group, and it's the same strategy to get buy-in among the members. And then our last 4 sites are scattered in Rock County, where we're seeing that's a relatively new group, and we're starting to build momentum in that area. All right, so let's look at some of the other issues. Complicates weed management. This is a concern. What they're really saying is it's going to interfere with our residual herbicide. So residual herbicide is soil applied herbicide which gives you, in theory, season-long weed control. In theory, it lasts for 40 to 50 days until the crop canopy takes over from a weed control basis. The concern is spraying into a green cover crop, you're going to have interception. Not all that herbicide is going to be effective because it's not going to make it to the soil surface. And the data shows that this is true. So here's some spray card data. Spray cards are an active chemical impregnated card that you put on the soil surface. You make the application, and then you see how much of the spray actually made it through. So this is in a no-till system. We've got crop residue that we got to fight through, as well as the cover crop. This is from an extreme case, and I need to credit Dr. Rodrigo Worley, who's doing work very similar to what we're doing in Jefferson County. So he's working with the planting green system. This is an extreme case. So he's spraying into rye that's really tall, 50% coverage of the surface area. So you'd expect there to be a reduction in spray coverage. And in fact, their data shows that is the case. In no-till, because we've got so much crop residue, we're not making it all the way to the surface to begin on. So here's no rye, we're only getting 22%. Put the rye in there, we're getting a 45% reduction. So that is a legitimate concern, and that's why most of the university extensions are warning against this, or at least caution. If you're going to do it, you need to think about this. And quite frankly, before I started planting green on my farm, this was one of my major concerns. The thing is, this data doesn't represent the normal planting situation. Typically, we're applying these herbicides when we've got a residue cover more like this here. Our canopies are anywhere from 10 to 25%. So does it matter? I don't have any direct data, but I've got some indirect data that says that it doesn't matter. The survey says cover crops help us to manage glyphosate-resistant weeds. Glyphosate-resistant weeds are a huge problem in the state of Wisconsin. The problem's been developing ever since we've used Roundup-ready traded crops, so corn and soybeans. It's become a real problem in the last 10 years. Here are our three problem weeds in southeast Wisconsin. The middle one is mare's tail. It's particularly troublesome in no-till, but also to a lesser extent in conventional tillage systems. Confirmed resistant like 15 years ago in Jefferson County. On the right is water hemp. I've talked about that a little bit. Confirmed resistant in the state of Wisconsin, also about 15 years ago. And then on the left, giant ragweed. Originally confirmed resistant in Rock County 12 years ago. These pictures and the problem is mine. These are from my farm. And it illustrates, and this site is now the second one confirmed resistant in the state of Wisconsin. This problem is particularly vexing because I followed all the recommendations from the university for resistance management. And still, the problem developed on my farm. The problem is that somebody else cannot follow the practices to prevent development of resistance, and it cross-pollinates, that pollen goes onto your farm. You've got the problem and you have to deal with it. We want to know, based on the survey data, the survey says, hey, these cover crops are helping us manage these glyphosate-resistant weeds. Does it work? Timekeeper, how much time do I have? Stop.
You got time for a question or two?
Do we have time? Let me summarize. I've got a ton of data that shows the yield response, that shows the weed suppression, that we can cut chemical use. And also what I wanted to talk about is a project that our group has. I'm happy to talk to you about it at our demonstration there. A long-term trial that we're conducting, comparing conventional with the best of regenerative. It's an economic trial conducting on county-owned cropland in Casey Park. Come on down and we'll talk about it. Sorry, I get excited at the data. I didn't get to the end. We are addressing it at the station.